Just came back from the store. I took a look at the prices and I just came back home. The cookies I used to buy for $2 are now going for $4 and I just couldn't take it. It's not just those cookies, it's everything. Didn't even bother going to see Superman this weekend. Last time I checked, the ticket prices were about $12. 3 years ago, it was $5. What on earth is going on? Why are the prices of everything going up? It just doesn't make sense, or does it? Why is inflation bringing us to our knees these days? We need answers to these questions and we need them now. What is inflation? Simply put, we hate inflation because it means that we are watching the prices of things go up while the value of money goes down. They're pretty annoying, right? That's why things cost more today than they did a few years back. If our great-grandparents were alive, they would probably have a stroke when they look at the prices of things today. Imagine telling one of those old-timers that a cup of coffee today costs anything more than 25 cents. That's how much they were paying for a cup of Joe back in the 70s. Starbucks should be charged for their crimes against coffee. Seriously though, it is frustrating to watch as the prices of things go up while the value of our money depreciates. Well, why does this happen? Surely that isn't natural, right? Why do we experience inflation? From what we know, different types of inflation occur for different reasons. For example, we have demand-pull inflation. This seems to be a natural result of the shifts that occur when it comes to the principle of demand and supply in economics. As you can tell, this type of inflation takes place when everyone wants to buy something that there isn't enough of. So for example, if people used to buy 10 tons of wheat at a certain rate when things are running normally, things may change when we suddenly run out of wheat. Due to this shift in the demand and supply dynamics, the competition to buy the remaining wheat products will result in an increase in its pricing. Then there is cost-push inflation. This seems to be the effect that occurs when the cost of producing things goes up. So if you find that the manufacturer has to raise the prices of his products because the cost of creating the products are now eating into his profit, you can refer to that as cost-push inflation. Another form of inflation that we notice these days is referred to as built-in inflation. This occurs when rising costs result in a rise in the cost of living. You'd find that as a result, workers may demand higher wages just so that they can maintain their now strained standard of living. In some cases, the cost of living may even surpass their wages, and as such, these people have no choice but to appeal to their employers. In turn, these employers may decide to increase the costs of their products so that they afford the higher wages that their employees demand. How is inflation measured? Looking at these different types of inflation, we may also wonder how we determine how high the inflation is. Well, you'd find that the governments of many different countries have figured out how to measure the rates of their inflation. After some research, we found that the most common way to measure inflation is by making use of the Consumer Price Index. Also known as CPI, this index is used to track how the prices of everyday goods and services change over time. That way, they can monitor the rises or the fall of prices to a certain degree. The most important thing that we may need to take note of in this situation is that a low CPI doesn't always mean that the rise in prices is occurring slowly. This means that even though the CPI could represent a small increase, people may still feel the sharp rise in the cost of things when they look into the intricate details of things, especially when the things that they really need have experienced a rise in pricing. Inflation? Are you really bad? Considering the effects on inflation, how come we don't try to keep it at a rate of 0%? Surely that would make things cheaper, right? Unfortunately, things are a bit more complex than that, and in the end, 0% inflation can be detrimental to the state of the economy. One of the reasons it doesn't make sense for us to have 0% rate inflation is because we actually need to maintain a small rate of inflation? What? Well, the truth of the matter is that small inflation is good for growth. This is why central banks aim to have about 2 to 3% inflation every year. This is because they believe that small inflation compels people to spend more as opposed to saving. This is because if people feel that the prices of things are rising, they end up buying things now instead of saving up for it. While this may annoy some of us, the simple matter of fact is that when people spend, this leads to the growth of businesses, which leads to the creation of jobs, which eventually leads to the strengthening of the strength of the economy. Another reason that we need to monitor the rate of inflation is that minus inflation is something that we don't want a piece of. This is because if the inflation drops to a level that is below zero, this means that the prices of things are actually going down. While most of us are begging for this at this point in time, this deflation, as it is referred to, could lead to a decrease of your salaries as companies will have to cut wages so that they could maintain their profit rate. In this scenario, even though everything is cheaper, we can only go window shopping because nobody has enough money to buy anything. Apparently, this was what made the Great Depression such a depressing experience. The massive deflation that occurred back then was just too devastating at the time. As such, we may want to avoid such a deflation of the economy as much as we can. Finally, we need to maintain a decent level of inflation at all times because experiencing the consequences of hyperinflation is not for the weak. Too much inflation is a killer, as prices can hit the roof at frightening rates. This is because when hyperinflation occurs, this means that the average prices increase by more than a devastating 50% rate every month. As you can imagine, this could be enough to bring all of us to our knees. Just look at what happened in Venezuela. The money became so worthless that the people of the country used to throw their money away. Frightening stuff. How to control inflation. In order to make sure that the rate of inflation does not go out of hand, both the central banks of any given country and their government work hand in hand. While the central banks work to handle the monetary policy of the country, the government makes sure they handle all the fiscal policies. What this means is that the central banks create ways to adjust interest rates and manage the supply of money in the country while coming up with fiscal policies such as adjusting taxes and keeping an eye on government spending. It's a tough job, but somebody has to do it. With any luck, your country is doing all it can to maintain your economy. That said, you can take measures to protect yourself from inflation by investing in valuable items such as gold or investment tools such as stock. What we must accept is that we cannot avoid inflation. Instead, it's best to stay ahead of it.